Welcome to Season 5 of the Photo Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Savannah Dodd, and I'm the founder of the Photography Ethics Center. Each week, I'll be talking with an accomplished photographer about the ethics of their practice. Today, in episode number 11, we'll be talking with Mohammad Alnobani about reducing bias in imagery. Mohammad is an entrepreneur and co-founder of The Middle Frame, a pioneering venture focused on revolutionizing Arab stock imagery and spearheading the development of generative AI for images in the MENA region. Mohammad has cultivated a thriving community of over 2,000 photographers spanning the entire MENA region. These photographers bring diverse perspectives and narratives to the forefront of visual storytelling, enriching the cultural landscape through their lens. Prior to The Middle Frame, Mohammad honed his skills and expertise in advertising. Eager to explore new horizons, he embarked on the entrepreneurial path, venturing into agency ownership in his native Palestine. For Mohammad, The Middle Frame represents a fusion of his creative inclinations and cultural heritage, a platform dedicated to sharing authentic stories and showcasing the inherent beauty of Arab culture through compelling visuals. Could we start by you telling us a little bit about what you do?
So definitely, my name is Mohammad Alnobani, and I co-founded The Middle Frame, which is a platform for Arab stock images. And the whole reason behind it was to provide media buyers, marketeers, content creators with diverse images from the Middle East and North Africa. And that was after I worked in advertising myself in Qatar and in Palestine, and we've continuously struggled to find authentic Arab images that relate to our cultures. And then I met my co-founder, Raya, who's a photographer herself. Myself, I worked in advertising, and together we kind of represent the supply and demand of a stock image platform.
I think it's really interesting to talk with people who are not maybe photographers on this podcast as well, because I think that always offers a new perspective, or a perspective that we're maybe not always as exposed to. I think sometimes in photography we can talk to ourselves a lot, but I think it's really great that you've been able to join us for this episode. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what the experience has been like for you as someone from a marketing background getting into the photography industry?
Yeah, so usually in advertising, specifically whenever we had campaigns that included photo shoots, we would be the client management team standing in the back, saying what we like, what we don't like, trying to feed into the art behind it, trying to feed on the angles, but it's not our specialization at the end of the day. We do understand enough to give our opinion and our thoughts on what the client would expect out of the photo shoot. But at the end of the day, every photographer has their own skills. So for me to step not into just photo shoots and behind the scenes, but also for a whole platform that gathers a community of photographers across the Middle East and North Africa, that was something, like to be able to talk to photographers, understand their language, understand their perspective on things. Like when a photographer wants to do a photo shoot and when they do their own pricing, when they want to sell stock images rather than selling images as art pieces, there's totally different diverse personalities and characters and experiences, even within a small region or even within a one city or one country. So definitely that was very interesting for myself to learn those characters, to understand them even before we launched the platform, to go down to the streets and talk to street photographers and go to events and talk to event photographers. And that was quite an experience to get myself into.
Absolutely. I always like to know more about people's experience working with photographers in sort of different areas or different stages of the process. So I actually wonder if we could maybe think back to when you were working more in marketing and in photo shoots. What kinds of challenges did you encounter in that process? Or did you encounter any challenges when working with photographers, or any ethical challenges to overcome, or maybe points of view to bridge?
Oh, definitely. So the agency that I used to work in was a 360 kind of agency. And not only 360 in terms of team members and departments, but it was 360 in terms of the clients that we work with. So we worked with automotive, we worked with hospitality, fashion, oil and gas, telecom. So that's when I understood that even for the creative team, whether it's the graphic designers or the photographers or the videographers, you do need to specialize in one thing. Like, there's a lot of photographers that, yes, they're multi-talented, they take great photos, but eventually to be great with different industries as well is a challenge. Now, of course, for the business itself, for an advertising agency, they're paying a full-time photographer who's in the office, so they're not going to hire somebody specialized in X and Y and Z. So that was an issue when we spoke with fashion-oriented clients specifically, because they are very strict about the look and feel, especially if you work with luxury brands, for example. And that's when our own photographers needed to understand that as well. And dealing with the models and the whole project and the operations behind it, to make sure that everybody's aligned, to make sure that everybody's happy, to make sure that you're not undermining the photographer's point of view. And just, I believe, similar to how a chef works, a photographer cannot be bothered all the time with different opinions from different people going in and out of the photo shoot. Like, oh, can we do this instead? Can we do that instead? And a clear script from the beginning is just like a clear recipe. Like, this is what we're getting ourselves into. And to be honest, sadly, like, I do not remember one photo shoot that ended on time as it was supposed to, because there were a lot of people going in and out. And that was part of the culture, like the internal culture within the client side and the agency side, that we needed to control. I used to always try to make sure that myself and the photographer, we don't have a lot of interactions unless it's necessary, because they need to focus, they need to finalize things. Now, in terms of ethics, we didn't really face much as long as we used to work with internal teams. Whenever we had to hire somebody external, then we needed to make sure that what clients did they work with before. That is, I do consider part of the ethics of dealing with somebody who worked with direct competitors. Basically, the creative output kind of shows when you work with two clients in the same field that have direct competition, the result is going to be pretty similar in most cases. So that is something regarding the ethics behind it, at least.
That's really interesting, because I'd be quite interested to know how that sort of plays into then the stock image game. But yeah, no, let's maybe thinking more as well about when you started the middle frame, and obviously you're coming at this from a marketing, advertising background, and then your co-founder is a photographer. So I wonder if you could maybe describe that process of working together, and were there any challenges there, and how did you negotiate that together?
Yeah, so when we first met, actually, Raya, she actually opened the topic of starting an Arab stock image platform as an idea. She pitched it, and I was like, I do know the pain, I've been through it, I've struggled to find those images. She's right. But the first question was like, you're a photographer yourself, why don't you upload on international stock image platforms? And she was like, have you ever tried? I was like, I'm not a photographer. And she was like, it's a horrible process. It's very lengthy. It's very complicated. And if you're coming from a place where English is your second language, you have to go through agreements in English that you wouldn't really understand half of it in terms of legal terms. So it was too complicated for her to join such international platforms and to contribute her images too. So we needed to validate that, like, do all photographers in our region feel the same? And I needed to validate from my side, was it only me and my team that struggled to find Arab images to use in our content or in advertising and so on? So we went on to that trip, like, where Raya talked to photographers, I talked to advertising agencies. And we took that starting point as the lead to our roles in the company. We didn't really start off with, oh, who's the CEO and so on. We are a startup at the end of the day. We just wanted to get the job done, launch a product into the market, have some validation. So, but we did stick to our backgrounds. She knew how to talk to photographers. She understood the field. She understood the struggles. And I understood the demand side. We did stick to our backgrounds, where she talked to photographers because she understood the field, she understood how they would react to a stock image platform, and I talked to the demand side. However, we continuously made sure to join each other's calls where she would introduce me to photographers and I would introduce her to the clients. And we would listen to each other's conversations so that we would have the 360 kind of input. And up until eventually it was the work is flowing, the product is launched into the market. Now we're stuck to our fields. Rarely do Mohammed go into the market and just reacts with photographers unless it's big event sponsorships. But it gave me a great understanding of what photographers care about. I used to think that 99% of the photographers would care that their image is sold for $1 on a stock image platform. Whereas I understood that no, photographers care about way more than that. They care about the copyrights of their images. Although they don't, there was very basic understanding in the region about copyrights and licensing. So we made sure to educate the people as well. But before we get into that. So after I understood that photographers care about exposure, they care about their name, they care about their image being stolen, that gave me a lot of more input that, it's not about pricing. And pricing, it could be one thing for many photographers, but it is not the main focal point that we should care about as only. And for the demand side, we also understood that most photographers would only purchase photos that are very low priced on stock image platforms. And they would go for the lowest and the cheapest option. And that also gave us an edge that no, it's not about pricing either. It's also about the diversity in the images, the authenticity of the content, because our images are quite exclusive on the middle frame.
I think it's really interesting to hear from your perspective sort of about what you learned from those conversations about photographers and their motivations that you might not have otherwise understood. And I guess I wonder now, looking back on it, do you think that there's anything that maybe photographers listening to this podcast, wouldn't necessarily know about, your side of it, maybe the management of the stock image library or being in that marketing or advertising role?
Yeah. So this is something that we actually kind of still struggle, where photographers would first ask us about sales and ask us how many clients are signed up on the platform, which I understand completely. They don't want to go through the hassle of sharing their images, uploading it to different places, and eventually not getting a revenue. But from a business side perspective, just like any marketplace, without showing your product, without showing what you have, you will not be able to get the clients on board. And this is something that we struggled on the client side, because basically the first moment we tell a client that we have an Arab stock image platform, they would literally just open the link immediately because they knew that there is a need. They wanted that platform. They wanted the solution. But eventually they would start searching. They want to check the diversity, the categories, the different photos that are uploaded. And that was for example, when we first started, we had 2,000 images uploaded. And we were proud that the product is launched into the market. But we struggled with the clients because they were 2,000 images, that's nothing. We cannot buy an image or subscribe to your website. Okay, we like a few photos, but it's not enough for us to subscribe or to switch completely to your solution. And we understood it, of course. We needed to get more images on board. We needed to get more photographers on board. Now, at first, there was the struggle of basically getting the photographers on board to sign up and upload their images. So we offered all kinds of support, where we would help with writing the description, editing the tags, whatever we can help in terms of filtering the images as well on the platform, helping understand licensing. So this was the key for the middle frame, and which helped many photographers in our region at least, is to understand the licensing terms you're getting yourself into when you're contributing to a stock image platform. Where are your images sold? When you see your images sold to on other platforms, that there are different partnerships between stock image platforms that would facilitate that as well. Now, the contributor and the photographer usually gets paid eventually, whether it's sold on my website or on my partner's website. But all of that put us in the region, at least in the Middle East and North Africa, as thought leaders within the stock image industry and helping people understand, helping the photographers understand. That actually helped us getting the photographers on board. But a message to all photographers is that, yes, I understand that you need to be careful where you contribute your photos to, because we also had regional competitors that had no registration, no incorporation in a country where licensing would be and copyrights would be protected. And photographers started asking us, like, if I'm contributing there, why should I contribute here as well? You're both targeting the same region. Now, of course, we don't usually mention the direct competitors, but we always make sure that the photographers understand that exclusivity, if you are exclusive to one platform, make sure that it's worth it. Make sure that the pricing is fair to you as a photographer, and make sure that the licensing and the copyrights are actually protected on those websites.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned a few things there that I'd really like to know more about. For example, the keywording and tagging on a stock image website. I know that there have been some scandals in the past couple of years about the way that keywording has been done, and ethical concerns about the way that things have been keyworded. So I was wondering, how do you approach that at the middle frame? Like, how do you, design your system for sort of categorizing and tagging images?
Yeah, that was a journey because we studied the competition, like the international ones, indirect and direct. We understood how it works. We checked how it looks for the public, and we checked it from the photographer's point of view. We decided to go into different experiments. At first, for example, we had no categories. We had only descriptions of images and keywords, where the keywords would act to categorize the images and help with the search for the clients. At a certain point, we understood that, no, we do need to categorize. It helps people. We didn't want to get ourselves into categories because categories are endless. Like, every single thing could be a category, and then there could be subcategories, and it could get complicated. So we put some guidelines into it right now. Every now and then, like every 2 to 3 months, we test and we see if there is a large number of images that could fall into something that could be labeled as a new category, then we would launch a new category under it, and we would shift it internally. Like, we would help the photographers and our photo moderation team, who actually helps the photographers moderate the images, check the content, check there's enough tags that could explain what's in the image, double check the description writing, especially for photographers who are English is not their first language, but also like they could need help with the writing and the description or translation from Arabic to English. We would support in that. And we would help with categorizing the images under the right labels, and we would double check the licensing. Like, for example, we used to give the flexibility for the photographer to whether upload an image as a creative image or as an editorial image, which is mostly like journalistic purposes. And we knew that there are issues. Photographers started noticing that, some like editorial images would cost more on the middle frame than creative images. This is across the industry, where news images and journalistic images are quite expensive. And there is a reason, because it's that one moment that the photographer caught on camera, and it's impossible to do it again. So when we tested that with the photographers, we understood that it's quite complicated, and we need to offer them help from our side. So the first thing that happens is the photographer uploads their image. We do have an AI that detects the objects in the image, gives a description for the image, gives suggested tags. But also that is an issue with the bias in AI, where AI in general is not trained on Arab data. So whatever Arab elements that we have within images, that is an issue on its own. So it won't detect it. And that's why we kept the photo moderation team on board, where they validate the information that is written, the tags, the description, and help with any translation that is needed.
That's really interesting about the AI, that you mentioned, and the way that those models are trained. And I'd like to come back to that in a bit, but I wanted to ask you first, we were talking about the categorizing and the keywording and the tagging. And I mentioned that, there have been some issues with organizations in terms of how things have been tagged. And I know that other stock image agencies have also struggled a little bit with the types of images that were available for sale in a sort of decorative way. And it sort of made me think about what you were talking about there about editorial versus art. And I guess when it comes to different types of images, do you have a mechanism to decide sort of what images can be sold and how they can be sold? And is there an ethical lens to that, or an angle to that you use when you're making those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what we maintain, and this is why we label the middle frame as very community oriented, we're very close to our community of photographers. The community management team are on board to keep in touch with the photographers and understand their point of view. So, when there's no description, or when there is a description that we want to edit or change, we do communicate with the photographer. We would be like, we want to understand your point of view. Why did you write that description? And when there's no description whatsoever, we never improvise and write our own. We always go back to the photographer and we'll be like, we want to understand, where was this photo taken? When was it taken? What's your angle on this whole photo? Why did you take it? Or what was the topic, at least, for us to understand? And then we would understand, because especially for the editorial and the journalistic images, we need to understand, like, was that moment actually a piece of news? Was there a story behind it? To be fair to the photographer, because sometimes it's just a group of people on the street if somebody's just scanning through the photos. However, when we talk to the photographer, oh no, there's a specific incident happening here, and this person, and there's this happening in this location, and this is why there's a crowd, whereas on normal days there's no crowd, for example. And we needed to hear that story. The photographer was in a hurry. They just uploaded their photos and they left us without description. So we wouldn't improvise on our own. And this is why, like, it was very important as well for our photo moderation to understand cultures. Like right now we have 3 photo moderators across the Middle East, and we're trying to hire more once we expand to other countries in North Africa and GCC, to make sure that we're safe in terms of understanding cultures as much as possible. When talking to photographers, you have to be very sensitive about it. Like, one incident could be very important for this village, whereas the rest of the region doesn't even know that it exists. But to be fair, it is a piece of news for this photographer coming out of this place. And the photo moderator and the community manager, they need to understand that, oh, there is sensitivity to this conversation. Now, in terms of the ethics on how the image is sold and whether it's creative or editorial, so how is the image eventually going to be used? Like, from a buyer's perspective, am I writing a piece of news around it? And this article could make me the journalist of the day or the week or the year. Or this photo is just something that I'm going to take some elements out of and design my own with it, as long as I'm keeping safe with the elements, like I'm not hurting anybody, for example, the model in the photo, and so on. And this is where we quite like decide on how the image is sold. The pricing is there are certain packages and subscriptions on the platform, so there are no changing prices. However, if a photographer would like to sell their photo exclusively for one client, we let them determine the price per image. So, for example, they took this amazing artistic image that could not be easily replicated. And this is when we understand that artistic images are not just creative images. It's not like I went into a very nice mansion and I took a very nice photo and the aesthetics of the image is amazing. But any photographer that steps into, not any, but similar talents could actually capture a similar moment. That reduces like how accessible is this image, or if it's easy to replicate the direction, the art behind it, and so on. Whereas news is more unique. And the same goes for very specific artistic images that cannot be sold as stock images, as a regular stock image that could be downloaded a million times. A regular stock image, just like on our platform and on others, could be replicated, but it's needed. And thousands of clients could use it. And eventually the photographer would earn a lot of money out of selling it 1,000 times. But sometimes when it's a very unique photo that cannot be replicated, the usage would also be very unique. And this is why we gave the flexibility where photographers could put an exclusive price to the image itself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's an interesting model as well, to have that sort of flexible photographer-led sometimes model as well. I guess I'm also thinking, in terms of images of like trauma or suffering. Are there images of sort of traumatic events on your website, and how do you manage that? I guess I'm thinking about. There have been instances where there has been like a collection of photographs, and photographs of, in particular, Black people and people of color are sold as decoration, and so I'm wondering, how, as a stock image site, do you, or can you, reduce the risk of images being used in that kind of quite gazy and inappropriate ways?
That's a very deep question, and I always mention it to the people that whenever we see those images uploaded on our platform, like for us, we're focused on Middle East, North Africa, and currently, of course, the biggest news is what's happening in Gaza. And we do receive images on a weekly basis from the events happening on the ground. And of course, it's all editorial, it's all news images. So in terms of licensing and usage of those images, it needs to be used in a very sensitive manner. It needs to be used for articles of news, basically, or publications. It's not made to be used commercially. And legally, that is the case. And we do have a specific partnership that covers specific countries where the usage of the image is protected. So if there's any infringement, there would be a lawsuit against it. But in terms of, let's put the legal side aside and just talk about the clients buying those images. Understanding the ethics of the image and understanding the photographer that went through a lot to take that photo, like the suffering in Africa, the hunger, and the wars that are happening all over the world. The photographers on the ground sometimes did not choose to be on the ground. Like our photographers in Gaza, they were stuck there and they couldn't leave. And some of them decided to stay to make sure that there's continuous coverage on the ground. So when you see such photos, just treat it well, treat it with respect, and give it its full rights. And the photographer that went through all of that. And dealing with the photographers on the ground in such instances, to be honest, was new to us. We understand the sensitivity, us being Palestinian ourselves, we know the struggle and what the photographer is going through. But to talk to a photographer that was injured just 2 days ago, and now he's back on the ground taking photos, it wouldn't be fair just to say, okay, just upload the photos, and when they're sold, you're going to take your percentage. We did act really differently, to be honest, as the middle frame towards that. When the photos are very sensitive, we would reward the photographers immediately, because we know that every support that we can give right now might not matter tomorrow, because it would be useless tomorrow. But today, as long as we can, then we could do it. Of course, this is for regional photographers in difficult situations.
I think that's a really good point about, sensitive or traumatic imagery, that we think a lot about, when that image is sold on, how it's used and how it's seen. But there is also an element of, considering the photographer who is in that situation, and in some cases are in extremely risky situations, and sort of how would they hope that the image is also used and seen. I think that that's something that actually we don't often talk about as much, but I think that's a good point.
True. Just to make sure that we think of all of the sides. And as much as possible, we would communicate with the photographer, if there is a specific entity that asks for the photos before they're uploaded. For example, it happened to us with one photographer in Gaza. Somebody asked for a bunch of photos, around 30, 40 images. And we asked about the usage. We made sure that it's fine. We talked to the photographer. We agreed on the budget together. And it wasn't a simple transaction of a stock image uploaded on the platform and sold. So that we try to be as flexible as possible in those situations, because we know that it's not easy.
I guess, yeah. I was just thinking as well about, cases of misuse, I think, because that's something that comes up a lot actually on the podcast, is a fear that a lot of photographers have that, once you take an image or make an image rather, and that goes out into the world, you can lose control of it. And if you're submitting it to a stock agency website, there's maybe that added feeling of risk that it's up for sale and it can be used in ways that maybe you didn't intend or wouldn't have foreseen. And so I think that's really interesting to hear, that maybe you take a slightly more hands-on approach. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's exactly, and it might not sound like, if there are any like investors or big businesses, they know that this is not scalable, this is not easy to do, and they would look at it like kind of like, oh, okay, it's great that you do it, it has great impact, but what are you going to do if you grew bigger, or if you do? We're trying to maintain our DNA into the company and into what we believe is right, because I believe everything that used to happen before and the large corporations that were built around like just growing bigger and bigger without really taking much attention or giving much attention to the community around it, lost something around it. Yes, they're successful, but they lost something. We believe that if we maintain this, yes, we might grow a bit slower, but at least we do give the right attention to certain details. And yeah, like a similar story, if I may, as well. I'm not going to mention all of the details around it, just to be fair to both the photographer and the other parties involved. But there was an image that was leaked. It was supposedly leaked from the photographer's side to the person that was in the photo. And that happened like 4 or 5 months ago. The photographer admitted that he gave the photo for free to the woman who he took the photo of. And the woman was in the sports industry, and it was a very specific sport. So there wasn't a lot of attention on the topic. And he was like, fine, like she needed her photo, so I gave it to her. And I was like, it's your choice. You're the photographer. You own the photo. Like, you do whatever you want with it. And he was like, but I uploaded it on your website as well. And I was like, again, it's still your photo. You gave her a copy because she was in the photo, and it's an editorial image. Basically, it was during an event. But then something really serious and very big happened around this woman. And she was the headline of the news for weeks. And the photo that he gave to her was the one that she gave the news and the journalists and everybody to use. So he came back and he was like, what can I do? And I was like, basically, it's her photo. Like, you gave her the photo. I don't understand the full conversation that happened between you two. If it was a photo on the middle frame that was leaked or stolen, then I could act on it. But you yourself gave her a photo. So you can't really do much. So it was a very interesting moment, especially when it comes to journalistic images or editorial and events and celebrities.
That is a really interesting example. And I feel like we're going to have to bring on like a copyright or legal expert at some point to maybe weigh in on some of these things. Because, yeah, I mean, that is very complicated. You also have a AI tool on the middle frame. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that. And I wonder if you could also maybe expand a little bit sort of in relation to the AI tool, but also the stock image library, why we need a specific Arab stock image library and an Arab AI imaging tool as opposed to sort of the other ones that are available.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. So the first tool that we used was to detect objects and the description of the image and what's happening within the image uploaded. And this is when we first noticed that we tried different tools and none of them actually was able to detect exactly what's happening in our context, in our cultural narrative. So we noticed that this is an issue, but we reversed it and we went into the trending topic of generative AI, and that was like last year. We tried to test the international tools again within generative AI, and we noticed that the same issue was there. Those platforms and those tools were not able to generate authentic Arab images. Like, authentic is quite a word when we're generating images using AI, but something that is specific and relatable to us. So, for example, when I'm trying to generate an image of a Saudi woman with the rest of the prompt and the details and so on, we faced that issue that the woman that was generated was wearing a man's clothing in Saudi Arabia, which is very culturally insensitive and inaccurate and everything. So this is when we noticed that, there is a need to our images and every image uploaded by a photographer to our platform that could be used as data sets to train AI and to improve results. And this is when we chose that the middle frame could launch its own generative AI model. It's not launched yet, but we're currently in data collection process to make sure that we cover the region as much as possible in different topics. And The other part within AI is being as ethical as possible towards the contributors, which a lot of platforms, unfortunately, are missing on. Basically, the contributors are not getting paid for their images when it's used to train AI models. So we thought if we are training our own model using our own datasets from our own contributors, then there is a fair point of view to pay those photographers back, especially when those photos are used to train an AI model. And the same goes when other AI companies approach the middle frame to license datasets through us. We would be able to pay back the contributors because we know where the images are coming from. I know that photographer like Bilal is from Egypt and he contributed 1,000 photos, and we took out of those like 500 to train AI. Then he gets paid for the usage and the licensing of those 500 images. So it just takes us through maintaining the ethics behind the platform and adding to the diversity and reducing the bias in AI, whether it's image recognition and data detection or in generative AI.
I think that's really interesting how you're describing that you do that not only for your own data set, but then it becomes a data set that can be bought and used to train and make other AI models more representative as well, while still giving back to the original image creator. I think that's a really interesting model. And I think relatedly, I'd like to know, like, if you could give any advice to other like stock image libraries or AI image generators, like what is it that they can do to make sure that they're creating an equitable process for photographers from your perspective?
Yeah. So this is that's actually something I wanted to mention as well within the photo moderation conversation we just had, is that we were talking to one of the partners that we were signing off a partnership deal. It wasn't finished. We didn't go through with it eventually, but it's still in discussions. But basically, they wanted us to contribute our images on their website and for them to contribute some of their images on ours. And it's normal to happen between stock image platforms, as we mentioned. However, when we noticed that the Arab images on their side was not labeled correctly, we flagged this and we were like, you do need support from a photo moderation team that understand different cultures. And this is not just for the Middle East and North Africa. Like, this is for Africa, this is for Asia, this is for Latin America. This is global, that when you work in photo moderation, and we were approached by companies that offer content moderation services. And our question was like, you need to be very specific with what you're offering us, because we need to make sure that the team understand the cultures. And the same goes for the global websites. You do need to take care of the moderation and the labeling and the descriptions and everything around an image, because once also that is fed into AI as data sets, it's going to cause more issues in the future, because AI is just going to read that data as, oh, this is Saudi Arabian, and the model in the photo or the way they're dressed is not Saudi at all. It's not culturally accurate. But it got into the model, it's already trained on it. So how are you going to fix that? So it's going to cause more issues to the future. So for the time being, just make sure that, first of all, the labeling and the photo moderation is done properly. And the second would be, as you mentioned, like protecting the photographers and the contributors. I know that a lot of like large stock image platforms are heading towards that direction, or took it already, like from the beginning, that every contributor where their images are used are going to be paid in return. But others did offer their data sets just to earn more money. And that is just sad to hear, because the contributors deserve to be paid. And a lot of models out there are built on either scrape data, which is not the fault of the stock image platforms, but it's the fault of how the AI models are built or how they're trained.
I think that's great advice. I think it's so interesting what you're saying about the keywording and you know, the implications of that, and the need for real awareness and understanding among, I guess, people at all levels in production, from the people making the images to the people selecting the images and the people labeling the images. I think that's really helpful. Is there anything that I should have asked you but didn't?
To be honest, we covered a lot with our questions, but maybe like, where do we see the middle frame, which is a very cliche kind of question, but it's much needed. Like, what are the hopes? Where do we see the middle frame going in the future, especially with everything that is happening technologically, basically, and the media types? Like right now, we're just focused on images, and every client would ask us, oh, did you launch videos? Can you offer us videos? And we were like, we're just trying to take it one step at a time. And it's not as fast as we thought it would be with the images, for example, but we did learn a lot through the process. And as long as we're keeping our community happy, we're happy. The photographers are quite loyal to the middle frame around us because we do make sure to appreciate them in everything that they do. And we do get where there's another feature on our website where clients could also hire photographers, which doesn't usually happen on stock image platforms. We thought this is not really the feature that the middle frame would focus on, but surprisingly, a lot of our clients started approaching us to hire talents through the platform. And we thought this is an interesting feature that we should include. And it feeds back to benefiting the community, where there's an extra passive income or extra source of income that could come through the middle frame, not just only through selling their images as stock images.
Absolutely. And the last question that I like to ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, what does photography ethics mean to you?
I would answer with two angles towards this. Basically, the ownership of the image. Unfortunately, not only in our region, but I found out that in many, many regions, ownership of photos is taken very lightly. If I take this photo out of Google and use it as a social media post on my personal page, it doesn't harm anybody because I'm not really benefiting out of it. But no, you are. And you did take something away from somebody who owned this photo at a certain point. And on the other hand, I would say with the photographer's point of view, when you take a photo, what's ethical, what's not? When you take a photo of a model and you upload it somewhere, of a person, and you upload it somewhere, just make sure that you treat it rightly. And this is what we've been pushing our photographers to do. Even if you, in certain situations, it's quite impossible to carry your model release around and ask people to sign it and explain why they're signing it and so on. But at least record a video with that person, record a voice note with that person, but preferably a video. Just have some kind of content that verifies that that person was okay with you taking their photo, or mention it to them. So this is I think it's a very broad topic, but it has a lot of angles. And now with AI, there's just way more details to get into.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast. The aim of this podcast is to share new insights about photography ethics with others. So if you heard something you liked, please share this podcast with someone who would appreciate it. You can also rate and review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. In each episode of the podcast, we ask our guests, what does photography ethics mean to you? This is a question that everyone in the photography industry should be able to answer. That's why the Photography Ethics Center is asking you, our listeners, to commit to writing and publishing your own statement of ethics. Visit www.photoethics.org/ethics to learn more and to take the pledge committing to ethical transparency, accountability, and awareness. That's www.photoethics.org/ethics.